an arrogant engineer, a humble, inexperienced bricklayer. All it took was a simple question for the engineer to humiliate him in front of everyone. What he didn't know is that this newcomer was about to make him go through the most embarrassing moment of his entire career. Stick around till the end. This story holds a lesson a lot of people need to hear. The sun had barely risen when Robert stepped through the construction site gate. In his worn-out backpack, he carried a few basic tools and a simple homemade lunch, carefully wrapped. It was his first official job as a bricklayer. And even though he was nervous, his face showed nothing but humility and determination. The older workers glanced at him. Some whispered. Others chuckled quietly. "That one won't last a week," said a laborer while mixing the mortar. Robert pretended not to hear. He just tightened his hard hat, pulled the laces on his work boots, and walked over to the foreman to introduce himself. "Robert Martinez, sir. I'm here to start today." The foreman, a man with a rough voice and a suspicious look, just pointed to a corner. "Start by helping with the leveling. Then we'll see if you know anything." Robert nodded and walked off in silence. It was then that for the first time he crossed paths with Dr. Bryan, the head engineer. He walked around the site with his back straight and cold eyes. Impeccably dressed, holding a tablet tightly in one hand. He was known not just for his technical skills, but for the open contempt he had for anyone he considered just manual labor. When he saw Robert struggling a bit to adjust a wooden level, Dr. Bryan smirked. "Who let the rookie play engineer?" Some workers laughed. Robert, embarrassed, just lowered his head and kept working. That first day, Robert gave it everything he had. He followed every instruction, carried materials, lined up bricks, kept the site clean. He didn't complain about the dust, the weight, or the judgmental looks. But still, it wasn't enough for Dr. Bryan. During the afternoon inspection, the engineer walked past Robert and, with no real reason, pointed and said, "Careful, kid. One mistake from you, and the whole project ends up crooked." The comment echoed across the site like mockery. Robert clenched his jaw and carried on, more determined than ever to prove he belonged there. At the end of the day, the workers gathered under a makeshift canopy for the foreman's final instructions. Robert stayed in the back, quiet, observing every single detail of the site around him. While the others chatted about their day, he studied every line, every measurement. He knew he didn't have a degree, but he had sharp eyes. And sometimes, that was worth more than any diploma on the wall. On his way out, he passed Dr. Bryan again. The engineer didn't even look at him. Robert just took a deep breath. There, on that raw concrete floor, a story was beginning, one he would never forget, and one that would make the engineer learn the hard way that respect isn't calculated, it's earned. The following days were a mix of sweat, dust, and silence for Robert. He stayed low-key, arriving earlier than most, and leaving only after everything was done. He watched everything, asked little, and memorized every move made by the more experienced crew. Despite his dedication, some co-workers still looked at him with disdain. And, of course, Dr. Bryan never missed a chance to reinforce that invisible hierarchy every time he walked by. On that hot Wednesday morning, the engineer called a quick team meeting. It was internal inspection day, and he wanted everything to be flawless to impress the board. The workers gathered in the center of the site, many still holding tools covered in cement. Dr. Bryan, wearing a brand-new hard hat and clutching his tablet, spoke in a firm tone. "There's no room for improvising here. Everyone does exactly what they're told. If you don't understand something, ask. If you make a mistake, own it." Robert listened closely, and that's when he noticed something. While reviewing the blueprint Dr. Bryan was displaying, he saw that the water drainage line had been placed dangerously close to a natural slope in the terrain. A heavy rain could easily cause water buildup and infiltration. Robert hesitated, but gathering his courage, he quietly raised his hand. Dr. Bryan arched an eyebrow. "Yes, apprentice?" All eyes turned to Robert. With a calm yet respectful tone, he asked, "Sir, sorry, but couldn't the slope in the back part of the land cause water to pool? Maybe it would be wise to adjust the level slightly." Silence. A few workers were already holding back laughter. Dr. Bryan let out a dry, mocking chuckle. "Well, look at that, folks. We got ourselves a new hydraulics expert," he scoffed, turning to the crew. Gonna teach me how to design a project too? Rookie, want to sit in my chair? The laughter burst out. One bolder worker shouted, "Give him a tablet, Doc." Robert felt his face burn. He lowered his eyes, humiliated. Dr. Bryan stepped closer, raising his voice so everyone could hear. Around here, we work with calculations, not with a bricklayer's gut feeling who can't even hold a tape measure right. Do your job, and let those who studied take care of the rest. Those words cut deeper than any scolding. Robert swallowed hard. He didn't argue, didn't look at anyone. He knew that speaking up would only make it worse. And in a place like that, he'd have just one shot to prove his worth through work. After the spectacle, the meeting ended in a cloud of whispers and poorly disguised jokes. Robert went back to his corner, picked up his shovel and level, and got back to work, as if nothing had happened. But inside, something had changed. He didn't need to lash out, didn't need to scream, didn't need to humiliate anyone. Tom would take care of that. And on that construction site, made of concrete and ego, time had just begun to work in his favor. The following days felt like a cruel loop for Robert. He worked in silence, surrounded by glances of disdain and quiet mockery. Every move he made was watched, every step judged, like he was constantly one mistake away from being tossed aside. Dr. Bryan, of course, ignored him completely now, treated him like part of the scenery, a necessary nuisance. But Robert didn't let it get to him. Instead, he observed, and what he saw began to worry him more with each passing day. While mixing cement, carrying blocks, building walls, his eyes caught things others didn't, especially the engineer. The northern foundations were starting to show tiny cracks, almost invisible, hairline fractures, like veins spreading through the concrete. It was a clear sign, a flaw in the leveling and water drainage. Exactly what he had warned about and had been mocked for. The recent rains had made everything worse. Some parts of the base were too soaked. Others were starting to quietly sink. Robert knew how dangerous that was. A construction site can hide problems for weeks, but when they finally show up, it all collapses at once. During breaks, he tried speaking with some coworkers. "Hey, did you guys see near the equipment room? The floor's starting to crack." "Relax, rookie," one of the older masons laughed. "New concrete always does that." Later, he quietly approached the foreman. "Sir, the drainage isn't working right. If it rains harder." The foreman just shook his head, annoyed. "The project's approved by engineering, kid. Do your job and stop trying to show off." It was like shouting into the wind. Robert understood. If he spoke again, he'd only humiliate himself more. So he did what he could. He started writing everything down in a worn-out notebook he kept in his back pocket. He noted the cracks, the terrain slope, the water accumulation, the misaligned walls. At the end of each day, before heading home, he took one last quiet walk around the site, as if saying goodbye to something about to collapse. And with each step out the gate, his anxiety grew, because he knew a silent disaster was brewing under everyone's feet. But no one wanted to see it. They preferred laughing at the rookie, mocking his simple observations, and blindly trusting the engineer's tablet and flawless numbers. Until time, as always, did its job. And when it did, there'd be no more laughter, only shock and shame. The sky was gray that morning, the day the board of directors was scheduled to visit the construction site. The entire place had been in a frenzy since the night before. Everyone rushed to clean, align, cover up flaws. It was like tidying up a house for a visit, except this one was made of concrete and steel. Dr. Bryan was particularly restless. He wore a spotless uniform, boots polished to a shine, and his tablet loaded with colorful charts to impress the higher-ups. Robert, as always, arrived early. He grabbed his shovel, adjusted his wooden level, and got to work. But something caught his attention. The damp concrete in one of the newly finished corridors seemed to be slightly sinking under the weight. The small cracks he had noted days earlier were now visible grooves. And near the northern foundations, the ground was already forming small depressions. The danger was real and imminent. By mid-morning, the board arrived. Luxury cars parked outside the makeshift gate. Well-dressed men and women stepped out, holding clipboards and wearing sharp, analytical expressions. Dr. Bryan greeted them with his most rehearsed smile. Welcome to our future headquarters, everyone. Everything is on schedule. Actually, ahead of schedule, he said with a chuckle. Quick laughs and handshakes followed, and the visit began. Brian led them through the newly raised structures, proudly showing charts on his tablet, quoting technical standards and impressive figures. Meanwhile, Robert watched from a distance and noticed every step the group took over the unstable floor. Each smile ignored the hollow echo under their boots. Robert's heart was racing. That's when he saw something that froze his blood. One of the main columns, supporting part of the second floor, showed a long, continuous crack, as if a line had been drawn across it by the sheer weight above. The engineer kept talking, gesturing, bragging, and no one noticed, until Robert decided to act. Without thinking twice, he walked straight toward the group. Some workers looked at him, alarmed. Interrupting an inspection? Madness. But Robert knew. The risk was too serious to stay quiet. "Excuse me, sirs," he said, voice firm despite trembling hands. Everyone turned. Dr. Bryan's face instantly darkened. "Who gave this labor permission to interrupt the visit?" he muttered through clenched teeth. But one of the directors, curious, gestured for Robert to go on. The young man took a deep breath. "I don't mean any disrespect, but I think you should take a look at this." He pointed at the cracked base. "And this too," he added, showing the uneven floor. The director stepped forward. He looked, then called over some engineers. They tested the ground, checked the marks. The cheerful atmosphere turned tense in seconds. One of the directors, now serious, asked, "Who signed off on this leveling?" Brian, sweating under his hard hat, responded quickly. "Everything's within the expected tolerance." The structure was designed to handle minimal variations. "Minimal variations?" said one of the technicians, crouching by the base. "This isn't minimal. This is settlement. The soil is giving way." Whispers spread among the board members. The engineer tried to defend himself, but now the technicians were focused and began spotting more issues. Poor drainage, shallow leveling, improper soil compaction. And Robert, humble as always, simply pointed out what he saw. Simple as a bricklayer, precise as a seasoned engineer. Dr. Bryan stood pale. He knew he couldn't blame the soil. He couldn't blame the crew. The technical responsibility was his, and now it was wide open for all to see. Thanks to that rookie, the one he'd humiliated in front of everyone just weeks earlier. At the end of the inspection, one of the directors made a point to speak out loud, so the entire site could hear. "If it weren't for this young man's warning, we'd likely be facing millions in losses and a serious safety risk." Then he turned to Robert. "What's your name, son?" "Robert Martinez, sir." "Well done, for your courage and attention to detail. We need more people like you in construction." Robert's eyes shimmered, but he simply lowered his head out of respect. Behind him, the co-workers who had once laughed at him now exchanged embarrassed glances. And Dr. Bryan? Dr. Bryan didn't know where to hide. The same humiliation he once threw at the young man was now reflected back at him, in front of the entire crew, the board, and his own ego. The job site, once buzzing with chatter and easy laughter, was now wrapped in a heavy silence. The inspection was over. The directors were heading back to their cars, exchanging quiet remarks. Dr. Bryan, the chief engineer, stood alone in the middle of the site, looking smaller than ever. No one dared approach him. No one dared laugh anymore. Even the foreman, who had ignored Robert's early warnings, just shook his head slowly, clearly ashamed. Robert stayed where he was, near the stacked bags of cement. He didn't seek attention. He didn't celebrate. He didn't brag. He did what he'd always done, watched in silence. That's when Dr. Bryan, clearly shaken, gathered the team for a technical reorientation. But everyone knew it was a last-ditch effort to salvage his image. He called the workers over, adjusted his helmet with shaky hands, and began. "We had a few items flagged during today's inspection, nothing out of control. Everything will be corrected accordingly." No one responded. He cleared his throat, stealing a glance at Robert, as if trying to choose his next words carefully. But before he could continue, the company's technical director, who was still on site, stepped in. "Dr. Bryan." Everyone turned. "From now on, I suggest we start listening more to the eyes of those who work on the ground, he said, pointing at Robert. Because a diploma isn't always what keeps the foundation solid. Dr. Bryan turned red. He forced a stiff, awkward smile. Of course, all input is welcome. The director didn't smile back. He just got in his car and drove off. As the engines faded into the distance, Dr. Bryan stood frozen. He knew everyone had seen it. He knew he hadn't just lost authority, he'd lost respect. He then tried, quietly, to approach Robert. He pulled him aside and, in a low voice, said, "Robert, thank you for your insight today. It was helpful." Robert looked him in the eyes. There was no anger, no revenge, just the calm of someone who had always known exactly what he was doing. With respectful firmness, he replied, "You build a structure with good materials, but you build respect with humility, sir." Dr. Bryan was speechless. He lowered his head, ashamed. It was the first time in his career that someone, without yelling, without insults, had made him reflect so deeply. And right there, in that quiet moment, the rookie bricklayer, who had once been mocked in front of everyone, became, without needing to say another word, the true master of that site. For the rest of the week, Robert became a reference. Colleagues who once looked down on him now came to him for advice. The foreman began asking him to review squareness and leveling. Even Dr. Bryan, little by little, started consulting him discreetly. But Robert didn't change. He remained humble, observant, quiet, because he knew that the bricks of respect aren't laid with words. They're built in the way you carry yourself, in your eyes, in your posture, and most of all, in the truth. And the truth was, on that site, the one holding everything together wasn't a diploma. It was the experience, courage, and humility of a simple bricklayer. The project went on in the days that followed. But something had changed. What was once a battlefield of inflated egos was now a place that finally breathed respect. Robert kept working the same way, quiet, focused, attentive. He didn't need applause. He didn't care for speeches. To him, the job site was always the same, a place to build, not to compete. But to his coworkers, it was impossible to ignore. The rookie who used to be the butt of their jokes was now being quietly asked to check measurements, review foundations, give feedback, not as a helper, but as someone who knew exactly what he was doing. One ordinary morning, while checking the plumb line a new wall, Robert heard a voice behind him. It was Dr. Bryan, this time without arrogance. "Robert, could you take a look at this alignment with me?" Robert turned around, and for a moment, he didn't see the proud engineer who had once humiliated him. He saw a professional, willing to learn, even in silence. He nodded and walked beside him. There side by side, no titles, no ranks, they worked together. Because in practice, under the weight of concrete, what truly held that site together was something far greater than status. It was humility, learned the hard way. It was respect, rebuilt in silence. At the end of the week, a small improvised gathering brought the crew together. Simple barbecue, low music, quiet laughter. The foreman, usually a stern man, raised a plastic cup and called for everyone's attention. "Sometimes," he said, "we don't realize when a true master walks through the site. Sometimes he shows up disguised as a rookie." Everyone turned to look at Robert. He just gave a shy smile and looked down. He didn't need applause. He didn't need trophies. What he had earned was far more valuable because he had built something real. Respect. Something no beam, no block, and no diploma can hold up on its own. As the sun set on the horizon, painting the newly built walls in gold, Robert leaned his shovel against the ground, took a deep breath, and looked at what he had helped raise. A solid structure, made not just of cement and steel, but of quiet courage, unshaken dignity, and a strength invisible to the hurried eye. Because on a job site, raising walls is easy. What's hard is raising respect. And Robert proved, with silence and integrity, that experience and character don't come from titles. They come from attitude. If this story touched you, leave a like and comment below. What did you take from this lesson? And tell us where you're watching from. Subscribe to the channel, because here we'll keep sharing emotional and surprising stories just like this one. See you in the next video.